Oh boy, another Final Fantasy XIV expansion. Another 1,000 hours dedicated to level grinding. And there goes the rest of our summer with it. At least we have an excuse to stay indoors. Before the real question, does Dawntrail kick off a new adventure worthy of the franchise? Is it any good at all? I mean, it's definitely a thing that exists.
Wow, what a ringing endorsement.
Alright, let's get into this. Fair warning, this video will contain massive spoilers for 7.0 Dawntrail. Discretion is advised. Now, this channel has made no secret how we feel about Endwalker. Mainly that it was an atrociously paced narrative filled with inconsistencies and plot holes large enough to steer the goddamn Death Star through. So I was already going into Dawntrail with plenty of bias. And while I couldn't predict where the story would go, I sure as hell didn't anticipate what would happen. Shit, I'm napping! Sweet mother of holy hell, never in the history of gaming has anything so successfully driven me comatose. I am honestly surprised that the developers kept awake long enough to finish the damn thing. The initial high we got from reaching a new city and a new region died out awfully fast, and then the lethargy kicked in. The Rite of Secession questline consumes the first half of the game, and it kicks off almost immediately. Worse yet, this entire plot can be described as a series of fetch quests all packed together so tightly, if we tried stuffing anything else in there, we would require a safe word. Most of our gameplay can be summed up as follows. Go to a place, get a task, run around in circles getting necessary components for said task, learn a lesson, move along. Almost everywhere we went from the level 90 through 95 quests follows this strict pattern with very few deviations. It was the case with the Merchant Village in the mountains. It was not much different with the Vandu Beast Tribe, nor the Hrothgar in the forest region. And yeah, I know that's not what they're called, but most names in this expansion are beyond my ability to pronounce, so please bear with me on the naming scheme. I'll be sure to include proper visuals, at least. So many of us have complained over the years about how 14 side questing amounts to little more than dragging out the runtime with trivialities. Fetch quests, run around in circles to find something, then report back the obvious. Do not get me started on random people asking me to run errands for them. I saved the world more time than Superman. Why the hell am I helping you with your chores, you cheap fuck? Dawntrail took that criticism and decided to quadruple down. So much running around, and standing around, and talking. Lots and lots and lots of godforsaken chatter. We do so little outside of the aforementioned fetching and questing that I fell asleep more than once. That is not hyperbole, people. I fell the frack to sleep playing this game. More than once. That has never happened before, and it isn't my age getting the best of me. Yet. In truth, Dawntrail's entire pacing was a mess. The first half ran slower than a morbidly obese diabetic patient moving uphill on their underpowered moped. Then after Wook Lamont claims the title of Dawn Servant, hey, I did say spoilers. After that, we wander around for a bit doing more useless filler. Then the action finally picks up for a short while, followed by more standing around and talking. Then standing around and talking in Cyberpunk land. Then standing around and talking in the Matrix, followed by a bit more fighting, then the end. Mother of mercy, even this explanation is putting my pale muscular ass to sleep. You know, this isn't the first time Sqaure Enix has tortured people with pointless filler. I had very similar complaints about the remake of Final Fantasy XIV. Now sure, it started off great, which that alone is more than I can say about Dawntrail, but after our little cross-dressing escapade in Corneo's mansion, the pacing started going to hell and back. The sewers and train graveyard, two areas from the original game you could get across in 10 minutes. And that's including the boss fight. Now they're both entire chapters of the game, each taking a solid hour to get through. It's 2 straight hours of filler crap, 2 padded areas, back to back. The indignant rage I felt was only barely quelled by Tifa's magnificent voice acting.
Hey, chicka bum bum.
And sure, the pacing did get back on track, until they did it again. The journey to the upper plate takes a huge chunk of a chapter, and then we get trapped in Hojo's lab, for no reason. And then they turn that into a padded area too. For no reason. I swear nearly a quarter of the game was strict padding or filler nonsense, at least. The only saving grace was the combat wasn't bad, and there was plenty of things to be done. The only benefit I received from Dawntrail was that it cured my insomnia through sheer boredom. I have seen plenty of people online arguing in defense of this game, so maybe they can help us see where Square's head was at. Some have compared Dawntrail to A Realm Reborn, arguing that we're returning to our roots for this introduction to a new era. All I can say in response to that is, who the hell thought that was a good idea? Realm Reborn was boring and long-winded. Now the game wasn't without charm, and subsequent playthroughs have given me a newfound appreciation. That doesn't mean we need to copy and paste a concept into Dawntrail. ARR only just got 14 back up and running after the disastrous version 1.0. I am sure we all have PTSD from being told to return to the waking sands 50 billion times. Nah, seriously, that single line will live on in gamers' perdition as a meme, and Wook Lamah's preaching about happiness will soon be joining it, I imagine.
I'll build on Papa's peace!
Bitch, shut up. Why in a million years would we return to that format? Also remember, we weren't just pissing around in ARR. The Ascians and Garleans both were being built up as impending threats throughout the game. That is more substantial than anything Dawntrail's first half accomplished. Other arguments suggest the first part of the game was world building, meant to give us a more three-dimensional view of this new land we're exploring. And that's nice and all, but world building alone is tiresome without some larger goal to work towards. Dawntrail's larger goal is the throne, for someone else that we had barely met or gotten to know by this point. It's a terrible excuse for exhaustively long cutscenes pumped full of exposition. I had read somewhere that Dawntrail has 21 hours of cutscenes. Now, I didn't time it myself, but assuming it takes 60 hours to reasonably complete MSQ, that's a solid 1/3 of the game. And cutscenes, standing around, and talking.
Oh, please. Who the fuck would watch that movie? All we ever do is stand around and talk.
Taking it easy for a bit is perfectly fine. Wasting time and being leisure with your script is not. Look to Stormblood for comparison. We spent adequate time with the Ari tribes, learning their cultures and values, just like we do in Dawntrail, except that didn't take half the freaking game. It was divvied up with a great deal of action and exploration we simply do not get in Dawntrail. Also, our interactions with the Aura were to secure their aid against the Garleans, so even that was part of a much larger, more encompassing goal. In Dawntrail, we're propping up somebody else exclusively, so the dynamic is already at a significant downgrade by that factor alone. Which leads us into the next so-called defense. The game is not about us, it's about Wook Lamah and her journey. We're to tag along. Okay, we've been in this situation before, often in fact. It's a common occurrence by nature of the Warrior of Light being our avatar. We don't get much characterization to avoid anything conflicting with ourselves, the player, so all too often we're shoved to the side. I've talked about this before. Look at Heavensward. We played third fiddle to Estinian and Ysael's characters aplenty. Stormblood again with Lys. Not quite as thrilling, that one. The difference is we still had shit to do in those games. I trust the pattern is becoming evident by now. In Dawntrail, we were standing around non-stop, exposition for days. History lessons about a land we have no investment in besides a game telling us we have to. Some people have even the audacity to compare our being here to a vacation. Perhaps the ongoing economic shitstorm has deprived folks of the luxury, but I was always under the impression that on a vacation, I get to decide where to go, what to do, and with whom I do it with. And by choose, I mean wherever my very humble income permits me. I have no real choice in the game, income included. Quest rewards are preposterous. All we get to do is run around performing whatever menial tasks the game gives us, hour after hour, hoping in vain that the next dungeon or combat instance is worth all the mediocrity. We should all be familiar with the general concept of doing repetitive, boring tasks with the expectation we can have fun eventually. They're called chores. That's what a majority of Dawntrail was. It's not a vacation, it's a chore. I'm a grown-ass man, and I hate chores as much now as when I was a wee lad. The fact now I'm paying other people to give me endless chores to do transcends beyond insulting and leaps right into kicking me in my testicles wearing steel-toe boots. The agony, oh my. Whether you liked the game or hated it, this is still a video game. We need shit to do. We need fights, good fights. More than what Dawntrail gave us. Combat instances, danger, and drama. We need stakes and hostilities that take much of the story to conclude. A variety of characters with unique skills and attributes, each compensating for each other's shortcomings. Antagonists that we are meant to take seriously. So much of Dawntrail's runtime can hardly be called gameplay. It's role-playing without much action or excitement. None of this touches on how most of the areas we visit in Dawntrail were fairly bland. The scenery is just okay for the most part. The only real alluring location was Living Memory, and we murdered it. Now it's less appealing than running the Labyrinth of the Agents for the 1000th time. But the people we interact with during the game? The story had to cover all the world building during the first half, resulting in many places getting little more than the briefest overviews. They were incredibly one-dimensional, save a few exceptions. The merchants weren't all that bad. We had a little more interaction with them. The bird people were so bland. The single person we interacted with the most wasn't even of their clan. He was a Hrothgar. Speaking of this guy, he was a tad bit amusing when we first met him. He kept panicking whenever he'd slip up and demand punishment, only to play it casually once he was told to let things go. Okay, it's simple, but I appreciate that kind of humor. The problem was he kept doing it. Again and again. The bit ran dry long before they stopped trying to use it. So even side characters who do get some attention aren't very inspiring. Some of the other areas weren't even that fleshed out. The goblins were as stereotypical as the ones in Eorzea. The Hrothgar are confined to a single village, and we only dealt at length with one person, so they didn't leave much of an impression, no matter how much the writers dragged out the time with history lessons and such nonsense. The world building was so phenomenally underwhelming because there was so little substance in the places we went to. With most areas visited containing only one or two minor villages, the landscape of Tyrol is insanely barren rather than enriched with culture as the game proclaims. The Yokoi, the Giants, they were the only exception. Their history factors into the Golden City plotline, which provides them with some greater depth. Of course, not everything needs to connect to a larger concept, not at all. It's when half your game follows that logic that shit starts to get real stale, real effing quick. And few people or places strive to hold your attention for longer than they're on screen for. It got so ridiculous that even our main cast is treated more as idle NPCs rather than characters with agency. And that was where Dawntrail went from being a borehole to downright insulting. Barring the fact that the opening cinematic teases the Scions, hinting they would have important roles to play, Dawntrail did absolutely nothing with the Scions. Hell, they barely do shit with any side characters start to finish. The first red flag was with Estinian, when he made his reveal early in game just to immediately piss off. Mighty rude even for him. You should have let Needhog use him as a meat puppet for a while longer. Half a game later, we happen across him again on the set of a Clint Eastwood movie. I admit I didn't see that one coming. And then he pisses off again. This time it sincerely felt like a slap to the face. Not from the character, no, from the writers. They kept teasing our favorite characters, making you think it was only a matter of time before they joined you in exploring this new continent. Then the story would yoink them away and leave you wanting more. Even those characters present barely contribute. The twins were such non-entities, they could have been cut from the game and we would lose virtually nothing. It makes their inclusion pointless. They just take up runtime better suited for other avenues, new characters perhaps to better flesh out the many cultures of Tyrol. I found myself wondering repeatedly what the hell they were doing there. Anybody could have done the bare minimum in place of those two. And they were not the only ones. Perfect example, Urianger and Thancred. They magically arrive in support of another candidate for the throne, Kona, Wook's adoptive brother. I was actually thrilled by this. Our comrades are crafty bastards. Competing against them would have been a blast. Thancred and his clandestine tactics, combined with Urianger's precise intellect, would make for quite a challenge. And then, the game does nothing. They help us in a pinch a few times, which is nice. They're still our friends after all. But that's it, and the first dungeon Thancred collapses a tunnel to impede us a bit. It was hardly a defining moment. The twist of them competing against us was utterly pointless and went nowhere. Remove their presence from the quest and honestly ask yourselves if we lose anything substantial. Their involvement was limited to pushing Kona's character development, and not by much. His interactions with Wook alone would have sufficed. These two were not needed. None of them were needed. Hell, G'raha and Y'shtola show up after the B-plot kicks in, 2/3 of the way into the game. The others could have shown up with them and we'd lose nothing of value. The Scions were just there, so when the action finally started, they were all conveniently present to help us fight. That was it. Like I said, it was insulting how their relevance was teased and then never pays off save for a few pretty neat action scenes. Which is why it came as no surprise when, upon reaching the final area, all of them bailed. Except for Kryle, of course, and G'raha. Obviously, Wook is still around. She's always around. But everybody else stays behind. I mean, it ensures the last stretch of the journey isn't horribly dragged out or convoluted with too many characters involved. But again, the Scions were teased the entire game. They were the ones in the trailer, and now that we're near the end, they're shoved off to the side. The story argues it's to protect our exit. Okay, fair enough. Any random NPC could do that. Why is our main cast being treated like nobodies? Why are they here if we never planned on doing anything with them? Now, you may think this is no big deal. I mean, we're in a new region, it's a new dynamic. Who cares if our main cast is set to the side for a bit? We can bring them back whenever we want. Yeah, see, it's not just them who are treated like dead weight. None of the other characters introduced get enough screen time to develop much for themselves. It makes an already slow-paced plot drag out even longer with a lack of character diversity to enrich the moment. Just look at Kryle. She's the newest addition to the roster, and despite being in the story as far back as Heavensward, she doesn't fare much better. More than any of us, she has a vetted interest in traveling to Tyrol, mainly regarding the mythical Golden City and her origins. But like the others, she's a non-entity in almost every other situation. Just another NPC helping to push the main plot along. Kryle's investment in the Golden City is played down so much, I found myself forgetting about her purpose until it's brought up again in a cutscene, and only briefly. What's worse? When she does learn the secrets about the city, it's off-screen. We are not present. We do not get to see her reaction in real time as she learns about her grandfather's work. We only hear about it later on when it's more narratively convenient. Her real time to shine happens when we reach Living Memory, the final area of the game. In this world with the reconstituted memories of the dead, we find Krau's parents. It's the first and only time she ever gets to meet them, speak with them, and it was an emotional reunion. I'm not bashing any of this, by the way. This was a profoundly sweet moment. A moment which turns bittersweet when we flip the switch and they blink out of existence. Man, that had to hurt. And then Krau fades back into irrelevancy for the rest of the game. She was only there for that singular plot point, which includes important background information about the world we're involved in. And once that's done, so is Krau. I mean, sure, she's not as useless as the others, but with all the free time the game had, especially during its first half, running around the country and completing challenges, she wasn't given a more significant role. It was wasteful, and there was so much more that could have been done with her, with many of the people we encounter, but it just never happens. And I cannot understand why. Sqaure Enix understands their own formula. A wide, diverse cast of characters makes a strong base for their games. Some of the best regarded titles in the series all tout a large player pool. Final Fantasy VII, 9, 6, and 14 itself has benefited from this exact formula. Shadowbringers chief amongst them. Every scion had their own character arc throughout the story, keeping us engaged in one scenario or another. This works so well precisely because no single personality appeals to everyone. If someone gets on your nerves, if a particular quest is getting drawn out or just doesn't capture your interest, no worries. We all know it won't be long before it's put to the side and another avenue will become available. It's why most TV shows you watch often have B and even C plots. It spreads out the story and keeps anything from getting stale. Dawntrail does away with this trend and gives you only one path. One quest that consumes the vast majority of your time, and it sticks you with one single character who steals all the attention and development from everybody else in the game. And spoiler warning, they were not a fair trade-off, in the slightest. We will have to continue this review in part 2. I apologize for splitting this up into multiple videos, but the rough draft was twice as long as most of my other scripts, and we don't need to drag it out for an hour. Please stay tuned for that. We've got a lot more to talk about. Also, if you happen to enjoy Dawntrail, don't hesitate to voice your opinion. Opposing views are perfectly welcomed here. I am only mostly an ass, not a complete one. And with that, please like, leave your comments down below, and subscribe. I'll see you in the next one.